It's time for the Bible Geek. I am that geek. Robert M. Price, postmodern, deconstruct, super-powered demigod. It's about darn time for the Bible Geek. I've been kind of busy lately working on my new book, Blaming Jesus for Jehovah, which is coming along pretty well. I think you'll enjoy it. And pretty shortly, the Human Bible, New Testament, ought to be out. I got to do one last proofread on it, but let's get right into some Bible Geek questions. Reuven, probably got enough scattered throughout my huge backlog of questions to do another Reuven Geek. But at any rate, here's one of them. In the Ethiopian Orthodox, I'm going to mispronounce this, Tewahedo biblical canon, the book of Proverbs is divided into two parts: Mesale, Proverbs 1 through 24, and Tagsas, again, if anybody knows the language, I'm sorry, Proverbs 25 through 31. What are your thoughts on this division? Is it an ancient Jewish division or something later scribes came up with? It is an ancient division, but only part of one, and I don't know how to explain the difference, but the book of Proverbs is a compilation of several books of earlier, shorter books of Proverbs, three of them attributed to Solomon, another one, two of them just called the Sayings of the Wise, and one which is attributed to Lemuel, king of Massa, and another one to Agur. And this does represent the last couple of collections. It divides right along that line, but why not preserve the other divisions? I got to admit, I don't know. I didn't even know there was such a division in the Ethiopian canon, which is very fascinating. I'd love to read a history of their canon sometime. Reuven asks again, could we view the Gospels as products of rival Antiochs? Luke wrote in Antioch near the sea, and Matthew wrote in Edessa, also called Antioch. It could be. I have no idea how one would determine such a thing, though I think there's a pretty good case for Matthew having been written in Syrian Antioch, because of, though it's not conclusive, you can't prove it, but there are some interesting circumstantial details. Matthew is certainly interested in the question of the Gentile mission, in which Antioch was very important in the early days, at least according to Acts. This is apparently the Syrian Antioch. It was a multi-ethnic and multilingual city, and it's certainly interesting that the evangelist Matthew does know the Old Testament text in Syriac, Hebrew, and Greek. That kind of fits. There is Pauline influence, what looks like Petrine influence, and Jamesian influence, and according to Galatians, all three of these factions were present. And so it kind of makes sense to me that that one comes from that Antioch, but really beyond that it is tough to say, very, very difficult. And so I don't have much of an answer, but anything's possible. Then another one from Reuven, is there any connection between the number of surahs in the Qur'an, 114, and the number of sayings in the Gospel of Thomas, also 114? I have wondered the same thing, but one thing that makes me doubt that is that it's a little bit arbitrary as to exactly how many sayings you want to divide Thomas into. Seems to me there's a couple of places where our modern editors have decided to divide one saying from another. Of course, there weren't any numbers in the original. The couple of places where it's not self-evident that they got it right. So I'm not sure if they naturally fall into 114. Whereas it's obvious that the Quran is 114 distinct surahs, though of course they too are a product of editing. But I don't really know. I wouldn't bet on it, but if there is a connection, I don't know what it is. I mean, it would have to be some sort of scribal or compiler's convention. I don't know if there's any other evidence on that. There might well be. Let me know if you find out anything. Let's see. Isaac says, I've recently been interested in historical evidence for Jesus being a real person or not, and so I've been looking at early references to Jesus. I keep finding references to Jesus having a brother named James. What is so significant about this James that so many sources want to point this out? Is there some significance in the name or some link to a famous person of the time named James? Well, James in early Christian tradition, like in the 2nd century, is put forth as the brother or half brother or foster brother or adopted brother of Jesus. That all has to do with what you think the relationship was between Mary and Joseph, right? But some kind of a brother or cousin of Jesus. And again, that has to do with whether you believe in the perpetual virginity of Mary and whatever status you assign to James and the others mentioned in Mark 3, Judas, Simeon, and Joses is going to be a function of that. What kind of brothers or cousins were they, and so on. It just seems to me Mark 3 should be taken as just straightforwardly as brothers, though it certainly doesn't explain anything. Doesn't go into any explanations. None were thought necessary at the time yet. But why do we even have such a list in Mark 3? Well, I think it's because, and many scholars say traditionally, that the brothers of Jesus were the pillars of the church. Have something to do with them. The pillars mentioned in Galatians. Paul went to present his gospel before those who were called pillars. Though that doesn't mean anything to him, he says. Well, the heirs of Jesus, or the desposunoi, those of the Lord, these kind of overlap somehow with the brothers of Jesus. And I think it's because, as Eisenman says, the idea of the 12 disciples are, that idea is based on an expansion of the leadership faction of the brothers of Jesus, who were like the Hasmonean brothers, Judah Maccabee and his various brothers who succeeded him one after the other as each died in battle. And I think it's the same idea, kind of a dynasty. Or Judas of Galilee, his sons and so on after him. Well, brothers, same idea. And I think the idea is that James was, the disciples are all like literary mitosis. Their characters split into new characters. And that Simon or Simeon Peter, Greek for Cephas or Cephas, Aramaic for rock, Simeon Bar, Simeon Cephas is the same, I think, as Simeon Bar Cleophas, the second of the so-called brothers of Jesus, who succeeded James, called the Just, as the you might say the Caliph of Jesus, his stand-in successor, and after he had left the earth by death or ascension or whatever you want to make it. And that the others were, who were all contemporaries, they had brief reigns as the Caliph of the Messiah. He's real important, and there are legends about James and his martyrdom, which I think, as Eisenman and Hans-Joachim Scheps have argued, James's martyrdom is rewritten in the book of Acts as that of the fictitious Stephen. So he's very important, considered a holy man in his own right, pious, Essene-like Jew, and so forth, and possibly even acting as a kind of a rival high priest of a sectarian group. Eisenman makes a good case for that. So he was very important. And it is possible that whether or not there was a historical Jesus, that somewhere along the line there was an attempt to get these groups who venerated different gurus together by linking their founders or heroes genealogically, just like ethnic groups in the Old Testament were. They would posit an ancestor of all of them and say, oh, they were all brothers, like the 12 patriarchs of the originally independent tribes of Israel. Well, John the Baptist is certainly a case of that, where Luke says, oh, he was Jesus' cousin. Yeah, sure. I mean, you never get that hint anywhere else, even in the Gospels, but it's a way of tying the two together to facilitate tying the two sects together, and I suspect that's what happened with James the Just. The Qumran sect, the Dead Sea Scrolls, Covenanters, that their teacher of righteousness was James the Just. And when they merged with Christians somewhere along the line, they said, all right, James was Jesus' brother. So what the heck? That's a way of sort of co-opting him, but giving him the some dignity and regard. I think that's very likely what happened. His being a brother of Jesus is as fictive as John the Baptist being a cousin of Jesus. So he was a major character in the early church. The Epistle of James seems to be accredited to him, though fictively again. And he's prominent in the book of Acts. Notice that in Acts 15, the Council of Jerusalem, James simply rules on the issue under discussion. They don't take a vote or anything. He issues this decree. So he's a major character and a real figurehead of Jewish Christianity, which may have been the same thing as the sect of the Dead Sea Scrolls. So yeah, it would be a link to a famous person of the time, the teacher of righteousness, I think. Okay, yeah, let's see, here's a couple of things on the Nativity. Oh, don't tell me I've lost the name of the geekish. Oh, I think I have. I'm sorry. But you know who you are. I have a question regarding the contradiction of the birth narratives. During a recent debate with a theist, they concluded there is no contradiction and responded with the following, quote, Josephus mentions that Herod died in the interval between a lunar eclipse and the following Passover, and many have assumed that it was related to a partial eclipse that was barely visible in the Middle East on March 13th, 4 BC, which would have been very unlikely since Josephus records a number of events that simply could not have taken place during a mere 29 days from the eclipse to the Passover on April 11. Still, for a long time, there wasn't much to work with. Fast forward to our time with exceedingly powerful computers, and NASA tells us that on January 10th, 1 BC, there was a total lunar eclipse that was visible throughout the entire Middle East area. Herod dies shortly after this eclipse, and there is a 12.5 week period to the Jewish Passover on April 8th, 1 BC. Now, all of the events that did take place after Herod's death could easily take place. I have no idea. I guess that the notion here is saving Josephus from being legendary or purveying fiction, right? I know nothing about this, but I will say I am suspicious when NASA is invoked to tell us that anomalous or unsuspected events in the sky in ancient history really happened. How do they know what happened? Well, of course, they weren't there. There's no film of it, right? They have to just extrapolate by calculating backward based on the usual motions, the observed motions of the heavens. This is more familiar from the attempt to say that Joshua's long day and Hezekiah's part of a day, when Isaiah got God to turn the clock back for him, that what do you know, exactly that amount of time is missing in ancient astronomical history. That's just bunk. We can trace it back to a charismatic blowhard named Don Basham, an exorcist who somehow used to work for some laboratory. the whole point of how they determine what must have happened in the past is by assuming regularities, uniformitarianism, as some like to call it. If there were an anomaly, you'd never be able to pick it up that way, right? And so it's, as someone called it, the surprise-free method. Whether this is another case of that or not, I have no idea, but I'm not really even sure why it would be important to an apologist. But anyway, this is, he says, and, wait a minute. This one is not in quotes, but it was long thought that, I think this is what his apologist friend said to him, it was long thought that Quirinius served once as governor of Syria and then had his oversight increased to include Judea when he ordered a taxation. And when he ordered a taxation, it resulted in a revolt in 6 AD, which, as you said, was well after Herod's death. But evidence surfaced in Rome in 1764 called the Lapis Tiburtinus, the Tiburtine stone, which proves that he served in the same capacity approximately 9 years earlier in 3 BC, prior to Herod's death, and ordered a census at that time. So when Luke records this census just prior to Herod's death, it is completely accurate. What are your thoughts on this? Is this just a flat-out lie? Well, it is pretty close. This has become a kind of an apologist's urban legend. William Ramsay, the great archaeologist and apologist, which kind of means axe grinder, he pointed to this and said, aha, there you go. He had this earlier tenure as governor of the province of Syria. But that's not what this stone said. It merely said in the vaguest fragmentary way that Quirinius had received some sort of reward or honor for service to Rome. And Ramsay thought, well, maybe it was an earlier tenure as governor of the same place. Look, that's impossible because, as Tertullian tells us, we know who was the governor, and there were 2 guys, Quintilius Varus, I think, and Sentius Saturninus, governor of Syria at that time. But the thing is, in Herod's day, Judea was not part of that Roman province. It was a technically independent client state of the Roman Empire, much like eastern Ukraine is of Russia today. So there wouldn't have been any Roman taxes in Judea or Galilee in the time of Herod, whether or not Quirinius had an earlier tenure as governor of Syria, since it didn't include Herod's area. This is why the revolt was in 6 AD, because this is the first time Romans had presumed to collect taxes, not back in Herod's day. So that's just a fantasy, as I always like to say. Oh, what a tangled web we weave when first we practice to believe. Okay, this is an interesting one also. Floyd says, I've been debating a preterist on whether or not the damned simply die or actually suffer eternally in torment in a literal hell. It is, or I should say a literal, hey Allah! It is my understanding that the Pauline epistles simply express that Christians will be raised from the dead to eternal life, while the rest of us will simply remain dead. But in the Gospels it seems to describe a literal hell where the unsaved are sent for punishment. I think you're right about Paul, or the Paulinist tradition, or whatever. 1 Corinthians 15 certainly leaves no room for the wicked or the unbelieving dead to come back to face the music, though, as you say, elsewhere, like in Revelation and in Acts, it certainly does. But anyway, Floyd gives us the gospel data here. Matthew 25:41. Then he will say to those at his left hand, Depart from me, you cursed, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. Matthew 18:8 through 9. And if your hand or your foot causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. It is better for you to enter life maimed or lame than with 2 hands or 2 feet to be thrown into the eternal fire. And if your eye causes you to sin, pluck it out and throw it away. It is better for you to enter life with 1 eye than with 2 eyes to be thrown into the hell of fire. Mark 9:45. And if thy foot offend thee, cut it off. It is better for thee to enter halt into life lame, than having 2 feet to be cast into hell, into the fire that never shall be quenched. Luke 12:5. But I will warn you whom to fear. Fear him who after he has killed has power to cast into hell. Yes, I tell you, fear him. Matthew 25:46. And these shall go away into everlasting punishment, but the righteous into life eternal. Matthew 13:40 through 42. Just as the weeds are collected and burned up with fire, so will it be at the end of the age. The Son of Man will send his angels, and they will collect out of his kingdom all causes of sin and all evildoers, and they will throw them into the furnace of fire, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. It is my understanding that many Christians believe that every human has an immortal soul that lives on past their physical death. In light of this view, the damned that are thrown into the hell of fire will be weeping and gnashing their teeth as an everlasting punishment. My preterist acquaintance believes that most of the verses I mentioned refer to Gehenna, which was an actual fiery place outside the city of Jerusalem, where bodies and refuse were burned. The fire may be burning 24/7, but the bodies thrown into it are simply dead and no longer suffer. The weeping and gnashing of teeth is not on behalf of those who died, but of people grieving the dead. Interesting. In his view, eternal punishment simply entails eternal destruction, not eternal suffering and torment. What is your take? Do you believe the gospel writers simply believed in annihilation or eternal torture? Did they view Gehenna merely as a garbage dump or a symbol for a literal hell? Oh, what a fascinating question. I happen to be working on a chapter on that very thing right now. The evidence is a bit frustrating. Let me just deal with the Gehenna thing. The Valley of the Sons of Hinnom is what that means. This idea that it was a garbage dump and that if you weren't careful and didn't repent, you could wind up there. That makes a certain amount of sense. The idea is that if it was a garbage dump, this is where the carcasses of unclean, that is non-kosher animals, would be thrown. This is also where notorious sinners who couldn't be given a decent burial in holy ground would be relegated. Very much like in Isaiah 14, where the king of Babylon, recently offed by the Persian invaders, he wakes up in Sheol, the netherworld, to the disdain and ridicule of the other kings of the earth, who all lie in state there, and each in his own tomb, which somehow is associated with being in the netherworld. I don't know how exactly, but the king of Babylon is not. He's just thrown out into the street like a sack of spoiled meat, I guess, like Mussolini hung from a street lamp post, right? So it might mean dishonorable casting away of the body. And again, think, on the other hand, of the great importance attached to burying the indigent in Judaism. The very important in the book of Tobit and in the Joseph of Arimathea story. But is this true about Gehenna? It was a theory suggested, I think, in the 12th century, 12th or 13th, by David Kimchi, a famous Jewish commentator. Because, what's he doing commenting on the New Testament? Well, he isn't necessarily. Gehenna appears in Jewish and Islamic sources also. but he's the one that suggested this is what it was. And again, it does make some sense, but it seems not to be correct because archaeology shows there is no evidence of a garbage dump or burning of any material at the foot of Mount Zion, which is where the Valley of the Sons of Hinnom was. And there would be. I mean, that's the kind of thing that leaves residue, and there's none in the area. However, more ancient sources, and by the way, that, as I say, that first appears in the writings of David Kimchi. It's not an ancient view as far as we know. It's not attested in any ancient source. I mean, it could be that old, and we just don't happen to have any surviving references to it, but no evidence is no evidence, right? And by contrast, in ancient sources, we're given a different idea of the origin of Gehenna, that it was a subterranean fiery realm ruled over by Moloch or Molech, choose your vowel, who was the god who received infant sacrifices in the Old Testament. Jeremiah and others refer to this, and this and the idea was that that Mount Zion was the sacred mountain, or the cosmic mountain, the Axis Mundi, and on top of the gate to heaven, the temple, which, as Margaret Barker shows in great detail, like all temples, was modeled on what they thought heaven looked like. And so down below, symbolizing what's under the earth, the nether world, there was this Tophet, or Gehenna, the fiery kingdom of Moloch. And so there you've got a kind of a subterranean hell. Now, this notion was probably borrowed in turn from, I know this sounds very bizarre, but from wandering Neo-Pythagorean missionaries from Sicily who had fanned out in ancient times all over the Mediterranean. They brought with them this eschatology based on the geography of Sicily, where they were from, where it's highly volcanic. There are volcanoes, lava pits, fumaroles, caves, and stuff like that, and that made them think, well, there must be a fiery underworld, so that a magma pit is really a hell mouth, like on Buffy the Vampire Slayer. And so that this was a Hebrew adaptation of that. But what it does not say was that it was a place of post-mortem torment, right? This demon god ruled it, but he is being fed by the infant sacrifices. And infants, well, is sure not being punished for anything. That's not the idea. And there's no notion that they're conscious of whatever goes on in Gehenna. No, they're just fueling the stomach of the god. And so now eventually it does become another name for hell, like the Greek Tartaros, where the wicked are consciously tormented, at least notoriously wicked people. So the question is, in New Testament times, it certainly had long already denoted a fiery underworld. But was it a place of punishment? And I would say, based on the allusions in the Gospels, yeah, it was. It says that there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. It's very clever, and I never thought of it to say, no, it means the mourning of the survivors of those who died and were thrown into the pit. But I think it's locating it in the outer darkness, the fiery furnace, and these various other Matthean synonyms. And that does imply conscious torment. Just as in Revelation, the smoke of their torment goes up day and night forever and ever before the throne of the Lamb. Well, that certainly implies they're being tormented day and night forever. Though who's the they? Well, apparently, again, just a chosen few notorious sinners, namely those who took the mark of the beast. It doesn't say what may have happened to the dead before that. Yeah, and but that other than that, the idea of weeping and gnashing of teeth doesn't necessarily imply how long this is going to last for. And the reason I say that is that Matthew has peppered his texts, parable interpretations and the like, with this phrase, and there shall be weeping and gnashing of teeth. I can think of 3 or 4 different places where he's added it. This was a Q phrase that appears one single time in Luke, and there it has to do, yes, with eschatology, but it says to the Pharisees or whoever, that I tell you, many will come from the east and the west to dine at table with the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, in the kingdom of God, while you, the proper sons of the kingdom, will find yourselves cast out, and there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Now, that could mean you, on the other hand, will be sent to hell, where you're going to be weeping and gnashing teeth because of the torture you're undergoing. But it seems to me, that's reading in an awful lot. Luke seems to mean, boy, are you going to be in for a bad surprise. You think you're first in line. Well, let me tell you, buddy, the first will be last. So you're going to, what? How could we be excluded? Like the guys in the judgment scene on that day. You'll say, Lord, let us in. Don't you recognize us? We used to do miracles in your name. What? I'm sorry. I've never seen you before. Your name's not on the list. Get out of here. Yikes. I think it's talking about that. Matthew is the one that seems to make it a matter of torment. Now, you could say that the weeping and gnashing of teeth is just the reaction of someone who didn't expect to be going to hell, like the bastards that destroyed the World Trade Center. They thought they'd be up there in the Playboy Club in the sky. I like this piece in The Onion back there 13 years ago that reports their reactions as they showed up for torture in Gehenna. Well, that'd be pretty shocking to find you're in hell, but then why? What's going on there? What, are you just hanging around the whole time? The whole notion seems to me to presuppose that it is a place of conscious torment. Now, how long does it last? That's difficult to say, because there is this idea that is not firmly nailed down in the Gospels, that you will get out of there, that your punishment is of a definite duration, because it's described in terms of debtor's prison, like the one where it says, I tell you, settle out of court with your accuser while you're on your way to the court. Because if you take the risk of actually having a judge decide the case, you might lose, and then the bailiff's going to take you to jail. Apparently it's a claims, it's a suit, not being judged for a crime. And he's going to rule against you, and you won't be able to pay, and so you're going to be thrown into debtor's prison until somebody can bail you out by paying your debt for you. So it says, you will not depart out of there until you've paid the last farthing. Well, that kind of implies you're going to pay the last farthing eventually, one way or the other, either by somebody paying your bill or by them torturing it out of you. And I suppose the two kind of fit together, because your loved ones could say, look, we got to get Uncle Mel out of there. Look what he's undergoing every day. Let's sell the camel and do whatever we have to get him the hell out of there. And after all, in Matthew 18, 19, I can never remember which, remember the parable of the unmerciful servant, where, I love this one, this guy's brought before the king, and he owes the king a huge amount of money somehow, and he says, oh, okay, time to pay up. He says, gee, Your Majesty, I can't do it. Okay, it's debtor's prison for you. He says, no, please, I just can never get that money. Have mercy. And the king thinks, he says, yeah, what the heck? This jerk will never be able to pay. What good's it going to do me to have him in the prison? Okay, get out of here. I forgive the debt. Oh, thank you, Your Majesty. He goes out, and on his way out, he runs into some fellow Schlemiel, who owes him a couple of bucks. And this guy, oblivious of what's just happened to himself, says, "Hey, Menachem, seems to me you owe me a couple of bucks. I don't have it on me, but give me a week or so. Nothing doing. You pay up now, or you go to debtor's prison," and he sends him there. Well, some of the other servants see this little altercation. They go back to the king's audience chamber. Kings commonly heard cases and stuff, and they tell him what happened. And he says, "Oh yeah, is that so? Well, bring that son of a bitch back in here." And they bring him in. "Yes, Your Majesty, some other favor you want to do me?" "You worthless SOB, I forgave you all of that debt, and you won't let this guy slide with the $2? Forget what I said. To the debtor's prison with him." And what does Jesus say? "And he delivered him over to the torturers." Yikes, until he should pay the last farthing. So, apparently it's not exactly a pleasant place, but you could work it off, sweat it off, so to speak. That's exactly the way hell is in Hinduism and Buddhism. It's not eternal, though it might take an awful long time for them to wring the dead out of your hide, right? So I think that may be the idea, which it's not eternal torment, but it's also not mere annihilation, much less amnesty. I do see that in the Gospels. It never really theoretically explains it, though, but that seems to me to be a plausible way of dealing with it. Yeah, okay. This is from Donovan Willett from Mobile, Alabama. From some of the stuff I've heard about the Golgotha Chainsaw Massacre, a.k.a. Gibson's The Passion of the Christ, a lot of stuff in the movie was based not on biblical sources, but on the visions of a nun, which gave a much more highly detailed version of the Passion. Was I hearing right, and what can you tell us about this version of the death of Christ? Well, I can do no better than to read you Albert Schweitzer's brief discussion of it from The Quest of the Historical Jesus. Certainly one of my favorite books, packed with knowledge and hilariously written. It's great. He speaks of the life of Jesus, which had been revealed to the faith of the blessed Anna Katharina Emmerich. And let's see, the bitter sufferings of our Lord Jesus Christ, where even the age of Jesus on the day of his death is exactly given. On that Maundy Thursday, the 13th of Nisan, it was exactly 33 years and 18 weeks less 1 day. The pilgrim Clement Brentano would certainly have this is an allusion to something else, but this guy Brentano took dictation of these visions. And eventually published them to the world, the life of Jesus as it was revealed to him by this visionary from the end of July 1820, day by day for 3 years. Let's see, what is a little footnote about her? Anna Katharina Emmerich was born in 1774 at Flamske, near Kursfeld. Her parents were peasants. In 1803, she took up her abode with the Augustinian nuns of the convent of Agnettenberg at Dulmen. After the dissolution of the convent, she lived in a single room in Dulmen itself. The stigmata showed themselves first in 1812. She died on the 9th of February, 1824. Brentano had been in her neighborhood since 1819. Das bittere Leiden unseres Herrn Jesu Christi, the bitter sufferings of our Lord Jesus Christ, was issued by Brentano himself in 1834. This Life of Jesus was published on the basis of notes left by him. He died in 1842, in 3 volumes, 1858 to 1860, at Regensburg, under the sanction of the Bishop of Limburg. First volume, from the death of Saint Joseph to the end of the first year after the baptism of Jesus in the Jordan, communicated between May 1st, 1821 and October 1st, 1822. Second volume, from the beginning of the second year after the baptism in the Jordan to the close of the second Passover in Jerusalem, communicated between October 1st, 1822 and April 30, 1823. Third volume, from the close of the second Passover in Jerusalem to the mission of the Holy Spirit, communicated between October 21st, 1823 and January 8, 1824, and from July 29, 1820 to May 1821. Let's see. Brentano himself ascribed to these visions the most strictly historical character and insisted on considering them not merely as reflections on what had happened, but as the immediate reflex of these facts themselves, so that the picture of the life of Jesus is given in them as in a mirror. Let's see, and he mentions another guy here. What's the whole name? Yeah, Johann Leonhard Hug, another Catholic, it may be mentioned, in his lectures called attention to the exact agreement of the topography of the Passion story and Katharina's vision with the description of the locality in Josephus. And if he had known her complete life of Jesus, he would doubtless have expressed his admiration for the way in which she harmonizes John and the synoptists, and with justice, for the harmony is really ingenious and skillfully planned. Apart from these merits too, this life of Jesus, written, it should be observed, earlier than Strauss's, contains a wealth of interesting information. John at first baptized at Aenon, but later was directed to remove to Jericho. The baptisms took place in, quote, baptismal springs, unquote. Peter owned 3 boats, of which one was fitted up especially for the use of Jesus, and carried a complement of 10 persons. Forward and aft there were covered-in spaces where all kinds of gear could be kept, and where also they could wash their feet. Along the sides of the boat were hung receptacles for the fish. When Judas Iscariot became a disciple of Jesus, he was 25 years old. He had black hair and a red beard, but could not be called really ugly. He had a stormy past. His mother had been a dancing woman, and Judas had been born out of wedlock, his father being a military tribune in Damascus. As an infant he had been exposed, but had been saved, and later had been taken charge of by his uncle, a tanner at Iscariot. That's assuming it's the village of Cariath. At the time when he joined the company of Jesus' disciples, he had squandered all his possessions. The disciples at first liked him well enough because of his readiness to make himself useful, even cleansed the shoes. It's beginning to sound like the penguin on Gotham. The fish with the stater in its mouth was so large that it made a full meal for the whole company. A work to which Jesus... You can tell Schweitzer's just picking out interesting stuff, right? A work to which Jesus devoted special attention, though this is not mentioned in the Gospels, was the reconciliation of unhappy married couples. Another matter which is not mentioned in the Gospels is the voyage of Jesus to Cyprus, upon which he entered after a farewell meal with his disciples at the house of the Canaanitish woman. This voyage took place during the war between Herod and Aretas, while the disciples were making their missionary journey in Palestine. As they could not give an eyewitness report of it, they were silent, nor did they make any mention of the feast to which the proconsulate Salamis invited the Savior. In regard to another journey also, which Jesus made to the land of the wise men in the east, The Pilgrim's Oracle, as Brentano's Oracle, his source, Katharina Emmerich, has the advantage of knowing more than the evangelists. See, in spite of these additional traits, a certain monotony is caused by the fact that the visionary, in order to fill in the tale of days in the 3 years, John's Gospel implicitly assigns to Jesus' ministry, makes the persons known to us from the Gospel story meet with the Savior on several occasions previous to the meeting narrated in the Gospels. Here the artificial character of the composition comes out too clearly, though in general a lively imagination tends to conceal this. And yet these naive embellishments and inventions have something rather attractive about them. One cannot handle the book without a certain reverence when one thinks amid what pains these revelations were received. And so on. That's pretty much it. And it's kind of reminds me of Levi Dowling's Aquarian Gospel of Jesus the Christ, an imaginative novelization purporting to be revelations, which of course the nun may have thought they were. I mean, she may have just had a great narrative compositional gift and just spouted it off like the great fantasy writer Lord Dunsany, who would just pace around a room enunciating these incredible short tales off the top of his head as his wife would struggle to keep up with him taking dictation. Well, he didn't sit down and plan the things. He just had this incredible access to the creative subconscious, and probably she did too. This kind of shows how right-wing the Catholicism of Mel Gibson was. That he would choose this and think that it was the authentic story of Jesus. You also kind of have to wonder how much of the gospel proceeds from the same sort of sources. That occurred to me back when I was an apologist. Of course, I didn't like the idea, but yeah. Okay, this is from Joe in Georgia. I was listening to a radio debate on Bible translation from 2011, and the Christian apologist they had on the show said the following: most scholars today have no difficulty with the fact that the canon of scriptures was formed by the end of the 1st century. Everybody knew what the Bible was. There were a few disputes, a few discussions over certain books, but the church fathers and the very early Christians had no problem over the vast majority of the New Testament. The Old Testament, of course, was already decided. For some reason, when I heard this, my BS detector went off. I'm no Bible scholar, but it simply sounded fishy to me. I'd like to ask for you to comment on this in 2 different ways. First, do you agree that Christians had the Bible canon, both Old and New Testaments, pretty much settled by the end of the 1st century? Second, even if you disagree, would you grant this fellow's assertion that most scholars share this opinion? I don't think that is correct, though it's not off by a whole lot, because I find David Trobish's work very convincing when he shows that the canon seems to, of 27 books, appears to be the work of one unique editor and compiler, and the hints are that it was Polycarp of Smyrna. Now, if it was, that implies it was the early to mid-2nd century. I have a sneaking hunch some of the loose ends were tied up by Irenaeus, who was a pupil of his a bit later. So it's maybe Irenaeus is writing about the canon in about 175 to 180 AD. He seems a little less certain than Polycarp was about some of the outlying books. He doesn't mention all of them, though I guess that doesn't really mean much. I mean, how often are you going to have an occasion to refer to Philemon or 2nd John, right? But it was pretty much settled. I also tend to think 1 Peter might have been a subsequent addition. I'm sorry, 1 Timothy might have been a subsequent addition, as Schleiermacher said, based on kind of hybridizing the so-called Second Timothy with Titus, but basically I would assume he's right that by the middle of the 2nd century we do have that edition. The problem is that was not the only proposed canon. There were others, and that is why 200 plus years later, St. Athanasius had occasion to send around his Easter letter, his encyclical to all the churches, because he was sort of a big name after having won the day at the Council of Nicaea some 40 years earlier. He sent around this encyclical stipulating that from now on Christians are to use only this set of 27 books, and it's the one in Polycarp's edition. This was not the first listing of those books, but the point is he wouldn't have tried to standardize the canon if there weren't still various other views. And a bit earlier than that, also in the 4th century, Eusebius tells us that there was still a lively debate. He lists the various books in different categories. The ones that everybody figures are genuinely apostolic. The ones about which there's some doubt, but there doesn't seem to be anything wrong with the writings. The ones that are probably not properly canonical, and then the what he calls heretical forgeries. But it's very obvious reading Eusebius, it's not a settled issue yet. And this notion that the canon was settled at the Council of Nicaea, that, I don't know where the heck that comes from. That was not on the docket. That was not settled then. And again, Athanasius is trying to settle it 40 years later, and even then it took a while because we have subsequent copies of the New Testament that have various other books. The Shepherd of Hermas, the Epistle of Barnabas, things like that. Codex Sinaiticus and Codex Vaticanus have extra books. And then churches that split off after the Monophysite conflict, which is generation or two later, like the Ethiopian, Coptic, and Armenian churches, they have extra books, which presumably means that was their usage for all those centuries. So it's not clear. I think these apologists want to say everybody knew what the Bible was, and that's not quite true. In fact, we only have the Nag Hammadi texts, which, as I'm sure you know, are pretty wild texts, because of this letter from St. Athanasius. The monks whose property these manuscripts were realized when they got this letter with a list that the guy that brought our copy of this letter is going to show up again maybe next year to make sure we are conforming to it. And we don't want to be caught with the hypostasis of the archons open on the pulpit. We better deep six these other books, but let's not burn them. Let's hide them away up in the cave there. They'll never spot them there. And they were discovered, many centuries later. But that just doesn't make any sense if everybody agreed on this. This is just part of the typical Eusebian paradigm of church history, which is just institutional apologetics. As to what most scholars hold, I really don't know. I don't know. Conservatives do, but these guys are not scholars in the same sense. They certainly know an awful lot and have expertise in certain fields. Bruce Metzger, Edwin Yamauchi, many others. I mean, their learning is very impressive. There are apologetics hacks, but there are many apologists that are genuine scholars, but they're spin doctors, right? That puts a whole different spin on the thing, right? And they're axe grinding. They're trying to defend. They're like Jay Carney and Josh Earnest at the White House, or pick any administration, and their spokes holds. You're getting a slant, and that's kind of what's going on there. So these people always tend to say, well, all scholars agree with us now. Don't listen to those other fruitcakes like Price. So I think they're exaggerating. Don Gwynn from the Sangamon County Rifle Association. I'm sure Moses would be proud of you. Of course, don't get the wrong idea. I've got my father's shotgun right here in easy reach at my desk. So anyhow, he says a Mormon friend of mine has been looking into the Lilith myths. That's a tongue twister. He writes horror novels for fun. Good man, and wants Lilith to make an appearance. I jumped into the discussion and shared some things I've learned from the Bible Geek about Lilith. One thing led to another, and he busted out with, there are satyrs in the Bible, too. Wait, what? I've been listening to a podcast that's going through the Mahabharata. Wait a minute, is this? Wait a second. Okay, I guess that's a question unto itself. Yeah, that's certainly the case. I was just reading something by Charles Hedrick in an issue of the Fourth R, publication of the Jesus Seminar, and it's about the politics of Bible translation, and he goes through all of these concordances and dictionaries, and he says there's no question that the Hebrew word in the relevant passage in Isaiah, it means satyrs, like one of these passages, and hairy ones shall dance. It's describing the desolation of Jerusalem and how it's going to be left for the porcupines and the possums and the vultures to hang out in, because it'll have been completely abandoned by humans. And even the satyrs, like Pan, right, will dance there. And he shows out, there's really no question that that's what this means, and that when some translators render the word as goats or mountain goats or goat idols, this is just, again, spin. It's just that it's the same way people read the chapter in Job about Leviathan, who's pictured pretty much as a fire-breathing dragon, like Godzilla, and they say, it's just referring to crocodiles. Wait a second. I thought you guys were the ones that don't like demythologizing. Well, yeah, but there's certain myths that even they cannot countenance, and so they demythologize the Bible. Of course, they don't admit they are, right? It meant to say not that Moses actually turned his staff into a snake, but that once he tossed it on the ground, people could say, hey, look at that thing. When you look close, you can see that it's a dead, dried snake with a metal rod in it. Get the hell out of here. It's ridiculous, because some things are just too much for even Bible miracle believers. And this is one of them. They don't want there to be satyrs and dragons in the Bible, but I'm afraid there are. Now, there aren't unicorns in the Bible, to Greg Gutfeld's disappointment, no doubt. That is a mistranslation. That's a reference to the aurochs, an extinct, but not very ancient, kind of an ox. And the translators just didn't know what it was. But so that's one where, that's correct. It isn't a magical thing, but these other ones are. Okay, another question, I think, by Don. I've been listening to a podcast that's going through the Mahabharata lately and loving it for just that kind of crazy mashup of cultures and myths, such as the Black Greek, quote-unquote, whom Krishna defeated by running away, or the time the Kauravas conquered Antioch. Oh, here we go, back to the satyrs. What's the deal with satyrs in Isaiah 13? My friend gave me a reference to the Jubilee 2000 version, of which I had never heard before, and the American King James version, both of which do indeed mention satyrs twice in Isaiah, according to BibleGateway.com. By the way, I love Bible Gateway. That is a really handy research tool. Yeah. Can you shed any light on this? I assume there's a translation issue here. I'm sorry. I thought you were done with this. I guess I've shot my wad already. I assume there's a translation issue here, as other versions range from goats to goat demons to the hairy ones in the same passages. Yeah, exactly. But as I've said, there's really no way to just translate it as goats. I mean, Goat Boy from Saturday Night Live, I guess that would be a legitimate translation. Also, while we're at it, do you have any light to shed on this Jubilee 2000 Bible thing? It appears to be some kind of numerological translation. The authors seem to be claiming that there's some special relationship between the individual English words they've chosen and the ancient Hebrew word they've translated. It sounds like they've tried to skip right past Greek versions. They've got a very impressive, but to me mystifying, chart of progressive numbers arranged ordinally for each book of the Bible, and they claim that only their translation contains these, quote, beautiful, unquote, number sequences and reveals hidden mysteries. Say what now? Yeah, Don, I've never heard of this, and I'm in no position to evaluate it, but I'm automatically suspicious of like Ivan Panin's numerical translation and various others, theomantics and the Bible code and all that. It strikes me as a kind of Rorschach blot way of reading the Bible. But again, I'm in no position to evaluate it, but I have never heard of it. I'm as much a stranger to it as you are. Hey, here is Marmer from Houston. Oh, Geek most wise, etc., etc. Thank you for answering my recent question. Now I'm bold to ask, for the sake of newcomers like myself, would you give a thumbnail biography and explain the significance of a couple of characters that keep coming up on the Bible Geek show? Marcion and Polycarp. These guys seem to have been responsible for a lot of things in Christianity. I looked them up in a few sources and found an overwhelming quantity of information. Can you cut through the thicket for us? Polycarp is... well, a lot is said about him in the early church, and it's hard to know what to trust. There are various versions of his martyrdom, which are obviously fanciful. It's hard to know if there's any residue of historical information. I guess we can say, all right, he was martyred and dragged into the arena and so forth, but beyond that, it's really tough to say. It's surprisingly, in Candida Moss's book on martyrdom in the early church, where she says it's been vastly exaggerated, as I remember, she doesn't really give nearly the attention to the mythical character of the martyrdom of Polycarp that she could. I think I called attention to that in my review of that book. But he was a major bishop. He's associated with Ignatius. There's an Ignatian epistle to Polycarp. I think those epistles are all spurious, but that really doesn't matter. The point is that Polycarp was venerated as a big name, and somebody wanted to link Ignatius with him. Some in the early church say Polycarp was a direct disciple of John, the son of Zebedee, but I believe Eusebius denied that. And so he was controversial, and conflicting things are said about him. There is an epistle of Polycarp which has so much in common linguistically with the pastoral epistles, 1st and 2nd Timothy and Titus, that P.N. Harrison, I think he ventured the suggestion, I believe Hans von Kampenhausen also, that the pastorals were written by Polycarp. They're written by somebody other than Paul, that's for sure. And others like John R.W. Stott, who died a few years ago. I had the great pleasure of hearing him speak 2 or 3 times and getting to ask him a question once. Even got him to autograph a couple of books, like Lovecraft refused to do with Lord Dunsany when he heard him read his work in public. He said he didn't go up to get an autograph because he didn't believe in fawning on the great. Well, I do. That's what they're there for. Anyhow, sorry, I did with Stott. He was certainly one of the great evangelicals. He said that he thought it was an argument for the authenticity of the pastorals that somebody as early as Polycarp was quoting them, but Doesn't seem that he is quoting him. It kind of looks like it's his own work. But who knows? I mean, the Epistle of Polycarp is so generic. It's you wonder if this is a pseudepigraph attributed to the great name of Polycarp the martyr. It's an irresolvable mess, I think. Was it Harrison again who argued? Oh, wait a minute. I guess he was just trying to argue that the pastorals must come from the same era as Polycarp because of the similar vocabulary that's different from any of the Pauline epistles. And I think he believed that Polycarp had actually written the epistle of... Oh, man, I'm getting them mixed up now. I guess it's not incompatible with thinking that Polycarp had written much von Kampenhausen thought. But Harrison thought that what we consider the Epistle of Polycarp would make more sense as two of them put together. I don't quite remember why, but I think it has to do with an anachronism if they're all supposed to be one. But it's not worth going into. He was a major character in the early church and a major opponent of Marcion. We'll get to in just a second. Marcion supposedly went to Rome with a great, huge offering for the Church of Rome as a kind of a bribe to aid his candidacy for becoming Bishop of Rome. He explained his gospel to them. They didn't buy it, gave him the money back, and he went and started his own fantastically successful church. But while he was there, he happened to run into Polycarp and said, as Judas does to Jesus in the last temptation of Christ, "Do you recognize me?" And he said, "Oh, yeah, I have no trouble recognizing the firstborn of Satan." And so not very happy meeting. So, yeah, he was a big anti-Marcionite. Let's see. What about Marcion? He was the son of a shipbuilder in Pontus in Asia Minor, specifically from Sinope, the same town Diogenes the Cynic came from. And he was the church's first great Paulinist. He understood the Pauline epistles. He had a collection of them, we're told. And I think that may be garbled, but the traditional view is he read the Pauline epistles, except for the pastorals, which weren't written yet because they're written against him, partly. I think that's pretty well established. But he read the epistles and from them concluded that Jesus had been the son of an alien god. He was not the son of the creator, the Hebrew Jehovah, who had given the law. No. That God was a rather rough customer. He was kind of like a barbaric king who did administer justice but had no compassion and so forth. And that's why he punished people and commanded genocide and was going to send people to hell and stuff like that. Well, an hitherto unknown God, the loving Father, sent his Son, Jesus, to offer salvation to the creatures of Jehovah, the Old Testament God. That he wanted to adopt human beings as his sons and daughters. But in order to do it, he had to pay ransom, basically, to their creator. And that's what the death of Jesus was. In fact, I'm not sure anybody else has ever come up with a plausible conceptual scenario of what it would mean for Jesus' death to ransom mankind. Well, Marcion did. And that's what Jesus was doing, dying on the cross. And so now we can be adopted. Main theme in Paul, right, and especially in Romans, adopted as the children of God. And this is why in the Pauline epistles you have God the Father all the time. Why say that almost monotonously? Well, to differentiate him from the other God, whom Paul calls the God of this world, the God who created it, 2 Corinthians. And so that Judaism and Christianity were completely different things. Jesus wasn't predicted in the Old Testament. He had nothing to do with it. He was establishing a whole new religion, which kind of fits with certain gospel passages. No one knows should I say, no one knows the Father except for the Son, and no one knows the Son except the Father, and so on. Could you say that about the Hebrew God? What, Moses hadn't known him? If he wasn't talking about that God, yeah. And so this was the big revelation of Jesus. But, as the Gospel of Mark says, the disciples of Jesus were knuckleheads. They were just idiots who didn't understand anything, right? This wasn't just Marcion's slander. Just read the Gospel of Mark, right? I mean, they couldn't be pummeled worse. And he says, well, there you go. That shows that these guys didn't get it. And as Paul was acutely aware, they promoted a confusion mixing elements of Judaism and Christianity. This is where Paul comes into the picture. I mean, on traditional Christian assumptions, what the heck is Paul doing there at all? Didn't Jesus go to the trouble to train these 12 guys to carry his message out there? What's Paul doing here? Creating a whole alternative wing of Christianity. Nobody seems to be too worried about that, but that sticks out like a sore thumb. It's the elephant in the room. And Marcion said, well, yeah, Jesus appeared to this guy subsequently to find somebody smart enough to get his message right. And so that's what Paul did. Hey, you don't have to keep the Torah. Jews do, that's fine. That's their God, that's their scripture, but we don't. We're not Jews. Nothing wrong with them. I mean, he gave a lot of credit to Judaism. He says there's a lot of good stuff in their Bible. The idea that they're going to have a messianic king to come to restore their independence, sure they will. I don't doubt that, but that has nothing to do with the revelation of God from Jesus. And I think a pretty progressive view. We would have saved ourselves a lot of horror in church history had Marcion's view prevailed. Wouldn't have had persecutions of Jews by Christians, I imagine. And so this was Marcion's view. And we're told that he had one single gospel, the gospel of the Lord, which he might have thought Jesus had written or that Paul had written. We don't know. But he didn't have anybody's name on it, and yet it appears to be a shorter version of the Gospel of Luke, missing a lot of Old Testament links and connections. In his set of Pauline epistles, there were Old Testament quotes, but they're not said to be quotes. That's interesting. Right? That's like he doesn't mind the stuff. It's a literary illusion, but he's not citing Scripture. Fascinating. Well, I think that a little revisionism may be called for. I think that it was Marcionites who made the collection of letters and the gospel and attributed it to Marcion, because I think Marcion is a little earlier in the evolution. I think that he wrote chapters 4 through 6 of Galatians, and he's sort of putting himself behind Paul. He's really talking about his attempt to go to Rome and set out his gospel to the big wigs. And when he talks about Paul going to Jerusalem and doing the same thing and so on. Then Galatians 1 through 2 is a Marcionite response to Acts's version of Paul. And I think various other Pauline epistles are really by various Gnostics and Marcionites. And then some are by Catholic writers or editors, and that what we are reading is a Catholic redaction, a kind of attempt to co-opt Marcionism by sanitizing Paul, by changing some wording, adding some passages, and then adding the pastoral epistles as a kind of a filter. Now, this is what Paul means generally, so keep this in mind when you're reading those other books that sound a little weirder. And the Marcionite church did grow like wildfire all over the Mediterranean, and for my money, they were the original Paulinists. I don't think there really was a first century, like mid to late first century Paulinist movement. I think that the by adopting Paul as the literary identity, the mask of Marcion and Marcionites and Gnostics, the impression was created that Paul in his thought went back to a guy named Paul who identified with Simon Magus in the middle of the first century. But no, that's why there's no hint of any kind of real Paulinism until you have Gnostics and Marcionites, who are the first to comment on so-called Pauline epistles, which implies to me they had not existed previously. So, Marcion is an enormously important character, and Polycarp does have this link with him. He didn't like him too much at all. And in fact, Marcion, or at least Marcionites, were the first to create a Christian scripture, a New Testament. Until then, the Old Testament in Greek, the Septuagint, was the Christian scripture. And they found what they thought of as predictions of Jesus and Christian readings of this and that. But Marcion couldn't do that. I mean, he liked some of it too. Kind of rewrote some of it, I think. But he couldn't have it as, he couldn't acknowledge it as Old Testament stuff. And he said, well, this is not our scripture. Let's not appropriate it. Let's combine some Christian writings. And hence they had the Marcionite scripture of the Evangelion and the Apostolicon, the Gospel and the Apostle. This shorter, I should think, earlier version of Luke, and these 10 Pauline epistles, shorter than the ones we have now, minus those interpolations and so forth. And this, as I say, Marcionite Christianity grew like wildfire. And I believe Polycarp put together a Catholic New Testament with more apostles and more gospels and more epistles and all that to counteract but co-opt Marcion. Okay, a New Testament might not be a bad idea, and even the stuff in his scripture, so it's pretty good, but we would need to tweak it a bit and add to it. So I think the New Testament we have that Polycarp put together was a kind of Catholic response to the Marcionite Sputnik. Very, very fascinating stuff. I think I'm going to hold it right there for today. I've got some proofreading to do, but I just couldn't let yet more time go by without meeting with yous geeks. And I'll see you, I hope, pretty soon again. I thank you for your help and support. If you can donate to the welfare of the Bible Geek and his family, sure would appreciate it. You can do that through PayPal. But if not, don't worry about it. I'll see you soon in any event, and thanks for being with me on the Bible Geek.